Hello, thank you for joining Whiny Women for our second whiny segment in Kelsey's story with her mom. And so we left off talking about just some gaps in the system, and we were just kind of like trailing off with that. Yes, there are gaps in the system. What are the biggest ones that you could fix? Like, that you, if you could, fix?
Our healthcare system is flawed. There are people, and again, going back to a Hope Compassionate Healthcare, the idea of the nonprofit, there are people that don't even have access to the basic healthcare for whatever reason.
I think the mental health care system especially that.
Absolutely. I think the focus is on the wrong thing, and then we have stigmas that become attached to people. I mean, there's stigmas attached to the homeless population. There's stigmas attached to
trafficking,
addiction. So then we have these stigmas that are put on people, and then they are less taken seriously.
Yeah, or less considered for job opportunities or volunteer
less considered. Like, they're considered almost less than human. People look at them sideways.
Yeah,
and so like with my mom, there was a time when she wanted help. So she'd go in and they'd say, "We don't have any beds. Sorry, we're full." Or the insurance will only keep you this long and then you're on your own. Someone that's dealing with that, you're not better in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. And so...
And to hear those words like, "Sorry, you've only got 3 days here." What you're experiencing compounds everything.
What are we going to do in 3 days? Yeah. I mean, you can't get to the root of that problem. Okay, so here's another problem. You go to a psychiatrist and they drug you up. Drugs, medication. There's medication being pushed on people. I used to tell, as a kid, I used to tell this to my mom. You need less medication and more therapy. These people need more treatment
for their root issues.
Yes, than they do to be put on medication that now is altering their brain even more, and then they can't get off.
And they're dependent on it.
And now they're addicted to the medication.
Yeah.
And just the focus of things are just incredibly skewed. Exactly. And so whatever the gaps may be in any sector of mental health or anything like that, people are they're falling through them.
Yeah.
And again, it's not even just the person themselves who is struggling with addiction. What about the families of these people? What about the aftermath of the families of the children that have lost their parents or have found their parents dead or have seen these horrible things? What about the parents that have lost their children? Parents are losing their children. Children are losing their parents. What about...
To mental illness, yeah.
What about the families? What are we doing for them? What about the children that end up in foster care because of all of these issues and their parents, they lose rights? Then the kids end up in foster care. What happens to them? Do they fall through the cracks too?
Yeah. And there's definitely huge gaps. I think when you add in like big government and it tries to like do something from that large of a scale, I don't think it's ever good. Like, and look at the DMV.
Oh, good grief. There's only so much government funding, too, for these programs. One of the best programs I've ever worked with, post my mother, as far as volunteering, was Teen Challenge.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work with Teen Challenge, and they're incredible. And so I look back now, and I say to myself, wow, I wish, if only I had known the things that I know now, not just about addiction, not just about mental health, but also about faith, about Jesus, about healing. If only I had known then about programs like the Walter Hoving Home or Teen Challenge, right? If only I had known, could I have gotten my mom into one of those programs?
Yeah. I think that there's a gap.
However,
I think there's a gap too in that where the government tries to keep, religion and religious
separate.
Yeah, separate. So therefore, even as myself, like I work for a company that works for DFS. They contract us out. So I've been very closely tied in my career with DFS, and we're not supposed to talk about our faith. We're not supposed to talk about religion. We're not supposed to, invite anybody to church. Yeah,
and
God forbid.
Exactly. And so those programs that are faith-based are so few and far between. and people don't really know about them.
Yeah.
But they take a completely different outlook and aspect on healing. What does that look like? People get saved. And so I had moments where I've struggled. When I was Miss Battleborn 2019, I founded Treasuring Tracy. And that was my platform. And it was addiction and overdose awareness in memory of my mom. So I did a lot of work. I worked with Child Haven. I went into DFS here. And so I got to do a lot of things. Foundation for Recovery was another thing, another program that I worked with. And I had these moments of like, could I have saved my mom? Like, if I can go back, and that's a very dangerous place to be in your brain. It's a very fine line to walk. Like, if I could go back, right? But I have another family member who's going through it now. And I got this person a bed at Teen Challenge, and they didn't want it. You can't make anybody do anything.
True.
You can't force treatment. You can't force Jesus. You can't force healing, and you can't make somebody get better.
It's true.
And of course, God's plan is God's plan. His plan, unfortunately, was not for my mom to be here. If my mom was still here, I don't know that I'd be.
Yeah.
And so it just gets down to just trusting and saying, okay, I lost this, and this didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but God restored. He didn't leave me without. And so the only thing I can do now, I'm my mother's only legacy. She had no other kids. I'm an only child. And I was the only thing that woman did right. She didn't have anything to her name. The car really wasn't hers. She didn't pay for it herself.
Yeah.
She didn't have anything to her name. She finally got her disability, and she bought drugs with it, and it killed her. Like, she literally had nothing except for me. So I am her legacy. Like, I'm the only thing that carries on for my mom at this point. And so that's the only thing that I can focus on going forward is being able to do that.
So what would you say are some just really bad either stereotypes or judgments that the population has with addicts, or things that you've heard as a, daughter of somebody?
I've seen things on Facebook and on social media that are so awful, where people have said, like, well, if they overdose, leave them there. Let them die. Don't send help for them. And I'm like, what? How inhumane and cold and heartless have we gotten as a society? Like, what if that was your child? Would you leave them there? I don't think so. There's just, people have gotten so heartless. And I'm not necessarily justifying behavior either. People make decisions.
Yeah.
They make their own decisions. Some people make their own beds, but they're not less than human. And I always think about, my mom was a little girl at one point. She was a child. She was an innocent child who had her whole life ahead of her. And bad things happened to her, and she got off track, and she never got back on. Maybe for a little while.
So from my experience with people who get addicted to substances, there's a lot of stuff the unresolved stuff. Do you know any of that stuff regarding your mom?
So there are some things that she tried to tell me when I was a kid, and I didn't want to know.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I got enough of bad images of you. Like, I don't need, I just didn't want that. But I think I know enough. And I think that she was trying because she wanted me to understand.
Yeah.
So from what I know, that she was raped at one point or another. And there's 1,000 different versions of it from my family members. And I'll never know now because nobody can tell me but her. But from what I understand, and maybe I'm way off kilter, but the way that I've processed this is that was probably the start of some things for her. Like, she hated being in crowds. She didn't like public places. She had PTSD.
Yeah.
She had horrible things happen to her. And probably more than that than I know of. And so she just couldn't get a handle on, whatever that was.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure. I can't, give details, but
yeah, that's okay.
I've come to understand her. There was a while where I didn't think well of my mom, and, at that point, rightfully so, but, I eventually came down off of the medication that I was put on because over the years they kept upping the antipsychotics that I was on. And I'm like, I'm not psychotic. Like, why am I being given these drugs? And so I came down significant amounts and I detoxed and I withdrew from those drugs. And I will never look at my mother the same again because it showed me people don't want to come off the drugs because it hurts.
Yeah.
It's painful. It's agonizing. If I felt that way, teetering off slowly, how did my mom feel when she was out of crack? Okay. I mean, that must have been horrifying to go through that. And so sometimes people want to be comfortable, right? We want to be comfortable and healing is uncomfortable. And it's easier. It's easier for people sometimes to stay on the drugs than it is to come off.
To face demons.
To do that process of coming off. And so I view my mom in such a different way now because I'm like, I admire her because she fought for a long time. And just that experience of coming off of prescription medication, I'm like, this is what my mom went through. And I got to this point where I realized, wow, my mom was the one person in the whole world that understood me better than anybody. Because my mom was living the things that I've been experiencing and the things that I've dealt with emotionally. And my mom got me. No teenager ever looks at their mom and says, you get me, right? It doesn't happen. No teenager thinks that their parent understands them, but my mom got me.
There was so today I was talking with my husband just about like how the majority of the population, like unless you've been through it, like you really, and like I work with traffic victims.
Speculation.
So like, unless you really are in deep with like victims who have experienced sexual trauma, like that is like the worst kind of violation, and it affects everybody around them. So I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, I don't.
You had to do that. I'm trying not to.
It's okay.
But so, moving forward from that, a lot of people that I know who have been through that, they choose to sit in it for the rest of their lives. So how did you pull out of that? And just like what was the point in your life when you said, you know, I understand, but I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that mom or wife.
Okay, so this is I will briefly share another story, but so basically after my mother died, I got into UNLV. That was my dream school, and then I couldn't pay for it. I had to withdraw. And I'm like, you know what, life, you suck. I'm done. Life kept kicking me while I was down, and it was that anger that fueled me to move to Las Vegas at 18 years old by myself, just to get on a plane and a one-way and just come here and say, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to Vegas. So I came here, and I've always been highly motivated, and I've always wanted things. I'm very driven, and I always knew that I was supposed to do something important, but I didn't really know Christ yet, and I didn't understand that religion, all these things that have happened to me are because of the call on my life, right? And spiritual warfare is real. So I get here, and I worked with a therapist. And this therapist, although I couldn't see it for a while, she was an angel to me in one of the worst ways, but she changed my life. And so she led me to Christ, and she also did some very horrible, unethical,
violations of
illegal
the practice
things along the way. And so that turned into a massive HIPAA violation where this woman who was also treating me as a therapist basically became like my mother. Mm-hmm. So she was I was in a dual relationship that I ended up in that I shouldn't have been in.
It was a violation of ethics.
Yes. And so long story short, that ended very poorly. Mm-hmm. And when that ended poorly, I ultimately had a nervous breakdown. And I was, and you remember, I was not okay.
Yeah.
I was bad. And so the one thing that this woman told me before we parted ways was, please don't stop going to church. Well, what did I do? I stopped going to church, right? I'm like, God, I'm mad at you. And if I'm not paying attention to you, then you're not paying attention to me. So I'm just going to go sit in my corner. And I'm not doing this anymore. And of course, I went back to church and I got fully saved. And so it was that situation when I had enough and I got tired of being abused and manipulated and walked on and being treated like dirt and protecting people that had no regard for me, was when I said, I am finished. I want more than this for my life. is when I'm like, I'm taking my life back. I'm standing up for myself. I'm standing up for other people so that this doesn't happen again to someone else. And that was really when I lost my voice. I lost my power. I almost lost my life in that situation. But it was that situation that brought me to Jesus. And that is where I needed to be.
Yeah.
And so from there on out, just finding my purpose in Christ and understanding that I do have I have a call on my life here, and just trying to figure out what that is, what does that look like, and continue to walk that out. But I've never been a quitter. I've never been somebody that gives up, but I did have to get to a point where I was being accountable for my own behavior. And so I did sit in some things for a while. Trauma is not the person's fault, so it wasn't my fault that all that happened to me, but it's my responsibility now to get up and help myself and get the help that I need and move forward. And I think that watching my mom go down like that has always been such a motivation.
So what do you think about, do you think it's a personality trait, part personality plus Jesus plus nothing, just Jesus, that really moved you to just say, I'm not going back there. I'm going forward no matter what?
It was definitely a personality trait because I wasn't saved when I came here. But that's something that God instilled in me. So really it all goes back to him. I mean, I was Catholic. I knew of him, but I didn't know him.
Yeah.
But God instilled in me what I needed to say, I am not my mother. I am not going to turn into my mother. And I want more for my life than this, right? Which is why I got on a plane and came here, right? Not knowing what was in store. But it started with whatever God put in me, whatever part of my personality. But I think I just got to a point where I had enough. I just had enough. And then I moved here, and then that mess of a situation happened. And then I got to the point again where I'm like, I've had enough. And so God tells me all the time when I'm in situations, he's like, are you mad yet? Because he knows that when I get fed up,
your anger fuels you.
The more fed up you are and the more pain you're in, the more likely you are to change. The more likely you are to do your work and to say, I have goals, I have ambitions, I don't want to be this way anymore. I don't want to be sick. I don't want to be depressed. I don't want to be these things. What do I have to do? Because if you're fed up and you'll do what it takes to move forward.
So what would you say your tips are for people who are just stuck? They're just living like they don't want to be living. They're in addiction or something that they just don't want to be in, but they just can't find that fuel. What would you say?
First and foremost, Jesus is the answer. I know that's so cliche and people say that all the time, but if you're trying to do things on your own, you can't. I never could have done what I have done on my own. But I think something else is important is being able to set goals. Yeah. Even if they're small goals. What do you want to do with your life? Yeah. Do you have a passion? Do you have a hobby? Is there something that you enjoy?
Yeah.
Even if it's something as small as tomorrow I'm going to get up and instead of laying in bed, I'm going to go for a walk and I'm going to go outside. Just taking things like day by day, setting goals for yourself. Set small goals, meet those goals, and go forward, and then set some bigger ones. Go back to school. It's not too late to go back to school. Find something you love or that you're passionate about. Take a photography class. Just find things that you love, that you enjoy, and just kind of walk that out. Go for it. Because when you have things around you that bring you joy and that make you feel, volunteer somewhere.
That's always helpful.
When I don't feel good about myself, I go and I volunteer. Like anything that brings you joy and that gives you purpose is going to help you. It's going to give you reasons to move forward.
Absolutely. So cheers to that.
Cheers.
Volunteering, purpose.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.